morning. Thank you all for coming out for this celebration, for certifying this cemetery as a historic landmark. We have some great speakers this morning. Our Senator Eldridge, Ben Haley from Mass Historic Commission. We're going to learn a little bit about the history of this property and why the state has designated it a historic landmark.
I'm so honored to be here. I've actually never been to the cemetery, so I'm so appreciative for the Massachusetts Historic Commission to place the North Cemetery, also known as Forest Cemetery, on the National Register of Historic Places. I grew up in South Acton and just was not aware of the cemetery, but Acton has always really appreciated and respected its history, and obviously we have Revolutionary history. We have history of our residents participating and fighting in the Civil War, so it's particularly important for us to recognize and remember those who fought for our freedoms who are from Acton. My understanding is there are 7 Revolutionary War era soldiers who are buried here in the North Cemetery and 2 Civil War soldiers, and it's just absolutely stunning, and I appreciate the fact that the town's work will hopefully raise awareness of the cemetery, so more residents are aware of it. We can pay proper appreciation to our veterans and really highlight that this is yet another part of our history. Acton has a very proud history, and I'm very proud to represent the town, and this national recognition by the Mass Historic Commission is an important moment. Congratulations to the town. Appreciate the Mass Historic Commission's work for the recognition. I'm really honored to be here, and thanks for having me.
On behalf of Secretary Galvin, the chair of the Massachusetts Historical Commission, I'm happy to be here today to celebrate the recent listing of this cemetery. The National Register is the country's official list of historic places worthy of preservation, so it's a great honor to be added to it. Acton especially has been active to preserve and document its historic resources. You have 3 local historic districts and the Acton Center National Register District, along with a number of individual buildings listed in the National Register. So that's really a testament to the importance that you as a community place on heritage and preservation. This most recent listing was thanks to the Acton Historical Commission and other town agencies, as well as the work of Public Archaeology Lab, which is a consulting firm. They prepared the nomination that our office then reviewed, and a lot of the information in that nomination is the basis of what I will be talking about today. So cemeteries are fascinating pieces of social and cultural history. Examples like this one, with a range of burials over about 200 years, provide insight into both different motifs popular on gravestones over a long span of time, as well as the evolution of beliefs surrounding death. The cemetery where we are today, the oldest in Acton, was here when the town was incorporated in 1735. It probably was a family burial ground for the Heald family. There are no stones prior to 1758, so we can't say that with absolute certainty, although it's extremely likely. The oldest extant grave, as I said, is 1758, and that's Mary Heald. Her stone features a somewhat abstract face, and that type of face is reminiscent of the work of a stone carver named Moses Worcester. It can't be definitely attributed to him, but he is an early Massachusetts gravestone carver, and it's exciting to think that one of his works might be in this cemetery. Many of the stones erected after Mary Heald's in 1758 represent popular styles from the mid-18th century through the 19th century and demonstrate how people responded to changing views of death and how the deceased were memorialized. This includes the death's head. There's one example in this cemetery from 1769, and a fairly late example of that type. The death's head was used primarily by Puritans and served as a visual reminder of death without an overt religious symbol. Winged cherubs' heads, there are some very nice examples in this cemetery, became popular on gravestones in the late 18th century into the early 19th century, and they were often accompanied by a change in how epitaphs were written from "here lies" to "here lies the body," indicating that the body is buried but the soul has departed. The urn and willow design, there are a number in this cemetery and they're very nice, appears on about a third of the stones. And it's an ancient symbol, the willow, of mourning. It's also a symbol of immortality because traditionally, no matter how many branches you cut, the tree stays alive. The urn represents the ashes that would have been placed in urns in classical antiquity when people were primarily cremated. Obelisks as grave markers are another way to emphasize the memorial aspect of burial, and there are some nice examples in North Acton Cemetery. Later in the 19th century, the rose and flower bud motif became popular, especially for women and children. And depending on how they're carved can indicate the type of person buried there. So a fully bloomed flower with a broken stem can represent death and old age, whereas a partially bloomed flower and a broken stem can represent death in a young age. After this time, fewer and fewer stones appeared with iconography. Stones simply listed information about the deceased and may have included a verse. This place is worthy to be preserved, and the town of Acton has shown that it is a good steward of its historic resources, most recently with the nomination of this cemetery. And so another valuable community asset has been documented for posterity.
Thank you, Ben. It's great to have some context and some understanding of why a cemetery like this is nominated. For Mass Historic to take that step and designate it and register as a historic place, they don't just go around the state and pick things to do. It takes a lot of work at the local level. And there's a lot of people that are here or represented here today that did some of that work over the last few decades to get to this point. We have our selectmen, historic commission. I know the Community Preservation Committee approved a grant to do some work to lead toward this nomination. Our natural resources team does a good job of keeping this cemetery looking good. Another thing that you should know about this cemetery is that every Memorial Day, James McCrae, our veterans officer, and other volunteers in town coordinate great Memorial Day ceremonies. And one of the things that they do is they come here in the morning around 8:30, and there's two buglers that play taps, sometimes just by themselves, but just as a way to commemorate the folks that are in here that served our country, and it's a really beautiful thing.